The memory of that precise moment lingers vividly in my mind. The late spring evening lingered, the sky clinging to the fading light, hesitant to bid farewell to the day. My husband extended an invitation to his business partner, Daniel, for an evening meal. Their recent acquisition of a new client ignited an atmosphere alive with the effervescence of champagne and the sound of joyous laughter. For years I had been acquainted with Daniel naturally. He and my husband forged their company from the very beginning, enduring countless late nights, engaging in numerous strategy meetings, and sharing more than a few bottles of whiskey in our dining room. He felt like one of us. Yet it was that night when I began to see him in a new light. As I was tidying up the plates from the table, he suddenly emerged in the kitchen doorway. I was unaware of his arrival. I simply sensed his presence. "You look beautiful tonight," he remarked, his tone so nonchalant that it nearly slipped by unnoticed. Nearly there. I stood still, plate clutched tightly in my grasp. My husband sat just beyond the threshold, absorbed in the glow of his phone as he scrolled through a cascade of emails. The word lingered in the space between us, heavy and elusive like a wisp of smoke. Exquisite. Daniel had never uttered words like that to me before. Throughout the years filled with courteous smiles, formal handshakes, and the rare exchange of light conversation about holiday adventures, not once did it occur. I wished to dismiss it lightly, to chuckle and remark, "Oh, you must have indulged in too much champagne." Yet, I remained rooted in place, scanning his expression for any trace of irony. There was none. As I remained silent, he carefully lifted the plate from my grasp and placed it on the counter. His fingers grazed against mine, lingering just enough for me to sense the intentional heaviness of the moment. "I appreciate the dinner," he said, his tone gentler this time. His gaze remained fixed on me. I offered a nod, conjuring a smile that resembled fragile porcelain on the verge of shattering. In that moment, my husband's voice echoed from the living room, shattering the enchantment that had enveloped me. That evening, as I lay in bed next to my husband, the sound echoed in my mind, relentless and unyielding. Exquisite. It was utterly absurd, I reminded myself. At the age of 43, I found myself in a marriage that had spanned nearly 20 years, navigating the complexities of life as the mother of two teenagers who seemed to regard me primarily as their personal chauffeur. It had been years since someone had called me beautiful, not in a manner that felt forced, unwarranted, or unfiltered. It was something my husband often remarked. At one point, in the days when our existence brimmed with new beginnings. Yet, amidst the flurry of board meetings, mortgage obligations, and the constant demand for rides to practice from the kids, the word had gradually slipped from memory. When Daniel uttered those words, even a single time, they burrowed deep within me. I reassured myself that it was insignificant, a misstep in speech, an act of kindness devoid of significance. However, in the week that followed, Daniel began to discover excuses to stay a little longer after our meetings at home. Small instances where it was merely the two of us, me pouring coffee in the kitchen, him adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. Each time, I sensed the heaviness of that word lingering in the space between us. Uncertainty clouded my thoughts. I questioned whether it was merely a figment of my imagination. Yet, on one particular afternoon as he was departing, he turned to me once more and uttered it again, this time in a hushed tone, as if sharing a clandestine whisper. Exquisite. In that instant, I realized this was more than mere imagination. A change had occurred. Perilous situation. For the first time in ages, I found myself uncertain about wanting to bring it to an end. Following that second moment, when Daniel breathed the word beautiful, as if it were a secret meant solely for my ears, I found it impossible to see him in the same light. I made an effort. I reminded myself to maintain my poise, to recall my identity. A wife, a mother, a woman who ought to rise above the fleeting whims of someone intoxicated by champagne or caught in a moment of fleeting admiration. Yet words possess a perilous nature. Once uttered, they cannot be taken back. Daniel's word, beautiful, hung in the air of every room we occupied, weaving through the quiet, a gentle reminder of something I had told myself I could live without, the desire to be wanted. The ensuing weeks unfolded in a haze of fleeting looks and meticulously cherished instances. My husband frequently toiled into the night, his focus bound to contracts and clients, while Daniel consistently appeared to fill the void left behind, submitting the necessary paperwork. lingering after meetings. He offered to help me carry trays from the dining room into the kitchen, a gesture he had never made before. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow through the kitchen, Daniel stood in the doorway, his presence a quiet anchor while I busied myself with the counters, the remnants of a long meeting still hanging in the air. My husband was upstairs, engaged in a call. Only the two of us remained. "You have a way of looking after everyone," he remarked softly, his tone imbued with warmth and assurance. "Have you ever allowed someone to look after you?" I chuckled, yet it shattered, fragile and anxious. Such is life, wouldn't you agree? As the years pass, the anticipation begins to fade. He advanced with measured intent. Insufficient to reach me, yet it was sufficient for me to sense it. "That must continue. This isn't meant for you." I clenched the rag with increasing intensity, my knuckles turning pale. "Daniel." I intended it as a caution, yet it escaped my lips as if it were a desperate request. He offered a faint smile before taking his leave for the night, and I was left quaking in a kitchen that suddenly seemed too confined, too warm, too vibrant. The following morning, I discovered that I was adorning myself in a manner that felt unfamiliar, yet I hadn't even noticed the change. A blouse that fell just a touch lower. A hint of lipstick I hadn't cared to apply in ages. Initially, I convinced myself it was solely for my own sake, that I yearned to experience joy once more, to truly feel vibrant within my own being. Yet, beneath the surface, I was aware of the true recipient. As Daniel caught sight of me that afternoon, his eyes momentarily sparkled, a fleeting glimmer. It was brief enough that my husband remained oblivious, yet sufficiently prolonged for me to realize I wasn't merely conjuring it in my mind. And then the dinner party arrived. A dozen of my husband's colleagues, along with their spouses, gathered in our home. The sound of laughter mingles with the clinking of wine glasses, while the hum of conversation ebbs and flows like the tide. I glided through the space, embodying the character I had mastered. The refined spouse, the welcoming entertainer, the lady whose smile concealed the tension lurking beneath. As I bent slightly to fill Daniel's glass with wine, he glanced up at me and murmured softly, "Tonight you radiate." It was a whisper, barely audible to anyone beyond the immediate vicinity. Yet it was sufficient to cause me to falter, almost causing the wine to spill. As the evening wore on and the majority of guests had departed, I found myself solitary in the pantry, struggling to catch my breath. The wine swirled in my mind, intertwining with the echoes of his words. As I swung the door open to venture outside, he stood there, patiently awaiting my arrival. In that fleeting instant, we remained perfectly still. The stillness of the house enveloped everything, save for the faint whispers echoing from down the corridor. He leaned closer, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers whispering against my skin. The caress was delicate, ephemeral, yet it coursed a tremor through every fiber of my being. "Daniel," I murmured, my voice trembling. "This is not how it should be." "I understand," he murmured gently. "Yet, it does not deter me." That night, I found myself lying awake beside my husband, my heart racing with such intensity that I feared it might rouse him from his slumber. I gazed at the ceiling, revisiting each instant, the phrases, the looks, that one fleeting touch. I realized I was poised on the brink of an irreversible moment. For the first time in years, the idea of falling no longer filled me with dread. It filled me with excitement. In the following week, I made an effort to steer clear of him. I believed that by maintaining my distance, by immersing myself in chores, work, and family dinners, perhaps the recollection of his hand grazing my skin would eventually diminish. Perhaps the resonance of his voice softly uttering "beautiful" would at last fade into silence. Yet longing does not fade so readily. It simmers beneath the surface. In the stillness it amplifies. Each time my husband spoke Daniel's name, be it in admiration, frustration, or even in passing, it ignited a fire within me, as if a spark had landed on parched timber. And then arrived the evening at the workplace. My husband requested that I deliver some signed contracts to the company. I arrived late in the evening, anticipating a deserted building. As I swung the glass doors wide, I found him standing there. Daniel, isolated in the conference room, sleeves pushed up, tie loosened, his hair tousled and cascading over his brow. His presence froze me in place. "Oh," I murmured, gripping the folder tightly. I assumed that all would have departed. He smiled, weary yet filled with warmth. The same could be said of you. I passed him the paper swiftly, attempting to disregard the proximity of his presence. Yet he remained still. As his hand grazed mine while he reached for the folder, that familiar jolt surged through me, intense, inescapable, and thrillingly perilous. I appreciate it, he murmured gently. There was no need for you to travel all this way. It's nothing, I murmured softly. Yet my voice let me down. It quivered. He inclined his head, observing me with a fervor that caused a pang in my chest. You tremble. I chuckled uneasily, retreating a step. It's time for me to leave. Yet, just as I was about to take another step, he extended his hand, softly grasping my wrist. Gentle and unassuming, merely sufficient to halt my progress. In a voice that barely broke the silence, he murmured, "Tell me you don't feel it too." I stood still, caught in a moment of sheer disbelief. The atmosphere surrounding us crackled with unspoken words, thick with the weight of all that remained unexpressed. I can't, I murmured in reply, my throat constricted. I cannot deceive. As I uttered those words, a fracture formed deep within me, a dam collapsing under pressure. He moved nearer, his face just inches away from mine. Our breaths intertwined, his hand lingering on my wrist, his gaze probing for my consent. And I offered it, silently, immobile, simply by remaining close. The initial touch of his lips on mine was so gentle that I nearly convinced myself it was a figment of my imagination. But then he kissed me again, deeper this time, and I felt myself coming undone, years of restraint breaking apart like fragile threads. We collided with the conference table, papers flying in disarray, pens tumbling to the ground. My heart raced, hands trembling as I held onto him tightly. Daniel, I breathed, pulling away from the kiss. This is utter chaos. He cradled my face in his hands, his gaze intense, filled with longing. Then allow me to embrace my madness. Only this once. I ought to have fled. I ought to have considered my husband, the dangers involved, and all that I had at stake. Yet, in that instant, everything else faded away. What truly mattered was how his touch ignited a spark within me, how his kiss reminded me of my essence as a woman, transcending the confines of being merely a wife, merely a role. After years of being overlooked, I finally felt seen. I was desired. We chose not to venture further that night. Perhaps it was the shared understanding that we teetered on the brink of an irreversible moment. We kissed until our lips throbbed, until our breaths came in ragged gasps, and then we separated, lingering in the softly lit room, our cheeks warm, our bodies quaking. I'm not sure I can bring myself to stop at this moment, I confessed, my voice trembling. He gazed at me, his jaw clenched, his chest heaving with each breath. In that case, refrain. As I navigated the road home, one hand gripped the wheel while the other lingered against my lips, still tender from his kiss. As I quietly slipped into bed, I noticed my husband was already lost in slumber. I reclined in the shadows, my gaze fixed on the ceiling, my body vibrating with a blend of remorse and desire. And beneath the surface, I was aware of the reality. The story did not conclude there. The journey had just commenced. The moments following that kiss were excruciating. We continued our daily routines as if nothing had transpired, sharing meals with my husband, attending business meetings, engaging in courteous exchanges in public. But beneath each word, each look, an invisible force drew us nearer. Every time I caught sight of Daniel from across the room, memories of the warmth of his lips and the pressure of his hand on my wrist flooded back to me. Each time his gaze met mine, an unvoiced resonance lingered in the air. I desire you. Yet, I desired him as well, with a sense of urgency. It transpired a fortnight later. My husband was away attending a conference. Daniel arrived at the house to collect some documents that he and my husband had been collaborating on. I ought to have passed him the folder, offered a courteous smile, and gently shut the door behind me. Yet I chose to welcome him inside. I find myself puzzled by my own actions. Perhaps it's loneliness, inquisitiveness. Perhaps fatigue had settled in, fatigue from the struggle, from the denial of what was already evident to us both. As he entered the living room, a palpable change enveloped the space between us. Initially, silence enveloped us. He placed the folder on the coffee table, his hands hesitating, as if the very burden of paper had become an overwhelming load to bear. At last he shattered the stillness that enveloped them. "Is it something that crosses your mind?" he inquired softly. I took a deep breath. Each and every day. In just 2 strides he traversed the room, and before I could gather my thoughts, I found myself enveloped in his embrace. His lips met mine with a fervor that was both immediate and unbridled, and in that moment there was no doubt, no retreat. We kissed with a desperation that spoke of longing, like 2 spirits who had danced around one another for ages, hesitant to bridge the gap. His hands glided down my back, holding me tightly as if he feared I might disappear. I held on to him with equal fervor, my fingers weaving through his hair. As he hoisted me up and pinned me against the wall, I breathed his name, caught between resistance and acquiescence. "Daniel, we cannot." "Indeed we can," he murmured softly against my throat. "Only this time. Please." Yet it occurred more than a single time. It was impossible. We shifted to the couch, the room swirling in a dizzying dance around us. Garments slipped away, obstacles dissolved, each layer of defiance shedding until only skin remained, radiating warmth and the unfiltered essence of our desires. All that remained was an enveloping silence, as if the universe had drawn a curtain, leaving only the essence of the moment. There was no partner, no betrayal, no one to deceive, only the warmth of his body pressed against mine, the way he caressed me as if I were something invaluable, as if I had finally been seen. And as the moment faded, as we lay entwined, our breaths heavy in the stillness that followed, I experienced a sensation I hadn't known in ages. Vibrant. Yet soon after there was nothing but silence. He caressed my hair, his expression a mystery. I longed to express a thought, a sentiment, yet the words remained trapped within me. At last he found his voice. "This is a turning point, isn't it?" I averted my gaze, unable to confront his eyes. "I understand." And yet, beneath the surface I found no trace of regret. Not at this moment. The warmth of his touch lingered, accompanied by the unsettling realization that a single night could never suffice. As he departed, I lingered by the door, long after it had shut, my body vibrating with energy, my heart pounding fiercely. I promised myself I would discover a means to extinguish it, to quell this blaze before it devoured all that I held dear. Yet, as I glimpsed my reflection in the hallway mirror, the woman looking back at me was almost a stranger. She had transcended the role of a mere wife. She existed as a hidden treasure, a whisper in the shadows of someone else's life. It unfolded on a Thursday, the sort of day that masquerades as mundane until it reveals its true nature. My husband organized an intimate gathering at the office. A new client, the dawn of a new quarter, with catered trays glistening beneath their steel domes. I donned a navy dress and a measured smile. Daniel walked in after the hour, sleeves rolled up, jaw clenched, embodying the essence of a man who had spent the night wrestling with his choices, only to rise still burdened by them. We navigated around one another in the familiar manner of those who have mastered the art of unspoken understanding. My husband brought his hands together to capture everyone's focus, lifted a glass high, and delivered a brief yet poignant speech on the themes of resilience and loyalty. He expressed his gratitude to Daniel specifically. He referred to him as brother. The crowd erupted in applause. Then, almost nonchalantly, he remarked, "And as we embark on this next chapter, we're introducing a new equity partner. Daniel will be transitioning out over the next 30 days. It's amicable. We've planned it for some time." The room went loud around the edges. Congratulations, questions, a rising tide of corporate politeness. I couldn't hear any of it. I was already looking at Daniel. He didn't look back. When the noise thinned, I slipped into the corridor. He was there by the exit staring at nothing. "How long have you known?" I asked. He didn't pretend not to understand. He exhaled like it hurt. "Since Monday." "Since Monday?" My voice cracked. "And you didn't tell me?" "I'm informing you at this moment." A chill settled deep within me. "He is aware." Daniel gave a single nod. "He arrived at my office." He exuded a sense of tranquility. That was the most dreadful moment. "In what way?" I inquired, although the manner of it was of little consequence. "Fragments," he remarked. The cleaners of the conference room stumbled upon a disarrayed collection of contracts. A receptionist noted that you had delivered them later than expected. A notification has been triggered by the hallway camera. He withheld the footage from me. There was no necessity for him to do so. He had reached his limit context. I was curious to know whether he refuted it. If he stood up for me. If he uttered my name as if it were a protective barrier. Pardon me, could you repeat that? The truth. At last, his gaze locked onto mine. I will be honest with him regarding you. The corridor absorbed the echoes of laughter drifting from the adjacent room. The door to the outside emitted a soft click with every person who passed through its threshold. What does he want to know? I said. Nothing for the public eye, Daniel replied. An acquisition. Non-disparagement. No contact. He raised the folder he held in his hand. Documentation that renders everything vanishing. And you consented. His jaw clenched. It was this choice or watch everything we created crumble into fragments. He would have reduced it to ashes to claim victory. I have been acquainted with him for quite some time. The reasoning was clear and precise. Still hurt. Is that all there is? For the organization, he stated. Then in a gentler tone. For us it must be. I longed to be consumed by rage. I felt compelled to express to him that he was opting for the path of lesser loyalty. Yet, the expression he wore was far from that of a man opting for the path of least resistance. It was the visage of an individual who had pressed his palm against a door, only to discover it was also a catalyst. He called me beautiful, I confessed, feeling the weight of my own vulnerability. Daniel moved in, halting just before making contact. For the simple reason that you exist. That's the sole aspect of this that remains uncomplicated. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. He withdrew a pace. I must sign, he remarked. This very day. What about me? I inquired, though the response was already clear to me. You don't need to sign anything to be erased, he said, and in a more compassionate world, it would have been an act of cruelty. In this instance it was compassion. He exited via the side door. I remained in that spot until the atmosphere recalled its ability to stir. That night my husband remained silent. Not inside the vehicle. Currently away from home. He poured himself a whiskey that remained untouched and observed a game that held no interest for him. The house was permeated by a chill, windows tightly closed, yet a coldness seeped from within the very walls. As the commercials rolled in, he silenced the sound. Is your heart drawn to him? The question struck with the force of a palm meeting would. I might have chosen to deceive. In response, I remarked, I'm at a loss for words to describe what it is. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the empty screen. I'm not seeking a revelation. I am presenting you with the facts. What information? I will be submitting the buyout tomorrow. He is accepting it. You won't encounter him again if he intends to preserve what remains of his reputation. He raised the glass, peered through it, then placed it back down. There are two paths we can take. I lingered in anticipation. We can tear our lives apart now, he said with calm resolve. Alternatively, we could create a post-nup, act as if we're entirely different individuals, and share this space like roommates who remain unfazed by the clamor around us. It required a moment for me to discover my voice. That speech was meticulously crafted by you. I had time, he remarked. Do you really believe I was oblivious to your absence? I observed. I never imagined it would be him. Who did you imagine it would be? I inquired, only to come to the unsettling realization that I was not prepared for the response. He never offered me one. He restored the sound to the game. The space buzzed with unfamiliar faces, their cheers echoing for stakes that eluded my comprehension. That night I found myself resting on the sofa. Upon awakening, I found an envelope resting on the coffee table, a preliminary version of a post-nuptial agreement. My name inscribed in tidy legal script. Empty spaces where ink could transform existence into an agreement. After a refreshing shower, I donned my clothes, placed the envelope on the counter, and stepped out the door. I secured a furnished apartment, its walls slender and its light more radiant than we had ever experienced. I explained to the children that we were taking space, as there's no scenario in which this doesn't lead a child to assess their own culpability. My daughter placed a plant by my door. Low maintenance like you, she quipped, and we both erupted into laughter. Weeks intertwined seamlessly. I discovered the resonance of my key fitting into an unfamiliar lock. I discovered the gentle power of silence when it is embraced intentionally. On a seemingly ordinary afternoon, a courier arrived, delivering a flat white box devoid of any return address. Within the confines of the envelope lay a solitary sheet of thick paper and a cufflink that caught my eye. The very one Daniel had misplaced beneath our couch on that fateful night when we ceased our charade. The message was penned in a script I recognized as intimately as my own. I have fixed my signature. I am departing from the city. I shall refrain from reaching out to you once more. There are thoughts I would express if voicing them wouldn't complicate matters further. Preserve the heavens. Preserve the term. D. There are no guarantees. There are no regrets. A line etched with grace at the edge of the unknown. I lingered by the window as the day softened into a more tender hue. I grasped the cufflink, a tiny artifact of a conversation that had abruptly ceased, leaving words unspoken. That evening I prepared a modest meal and enjoyed it at the counter. The gift from my daughter, a plant, has sprouted 2 fresh leaves. I reflected on the moment Daniel first uttered the word beautiful, considering how one simple term can serve as both an entrance and the mechanism that allows it to swing open. I reflected on my husband's expression, composed and serene, and how individuals cling to what they can preserve, even when it may not be what is truly needed. Often, I reflected on the version of myself that had slumbered for years, and the hauntingly radiant manner in which she emerged from her dreams. I chose not to return. The divorce arrived eventually, as tidy as the law can render a chaotic situation. We maintained our courtesy for the children and our efficiency for the lawyers. Eventually, he found love again and remarried. Over time, my anger transformed into merely another space I navigate. Occasionally, I take an alternate path home, meandering by the old office. The lobby carries the familiar scent, citrus mingling with polished stone. Individuals clad in fine coats engage in discussions about markets that fail to reciprocate their affection. I refrain from entering. On my dresser rests a small dish, holding keys, a spare ring, and a solitary cufflink destined to remain unclaimed. Next to it lies a card, bearing a solitary word, which I keep face down until its necessity arises. Exquisite. Not simply due to a man's assertion. For that very reason I do.